wonder how much, if at all, you guys have run up against that with the book, now with the movie. As far as did that really happen, and how much you had to accommodate some of the details and the facts and the characters to achieve the truth, the story that you wanted to tell.
Well, we haven't run up against too much of it. I mean, when you adapt a book for film, you have to change the structure of the story. You have to consolidate characters, because reality doesn't play well on film. It would be very, very long and boring, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to do those things, and everybody does it. But screenwriters who try not to do it, make terrible movies. So I had seen Running with Scissors and Augustin Burroughs, based on Augustin Burroughs' memoir, and they tried to be true to the book, and it was just a terrible movie. And so when I met Steve, I was excited that he sort of had the same mentality. We will consolidate some characters. We will change some of the facts. We will keep, the story essentially true. We don't want to get too far from the book, and yet we also don't want to get so close to the book that we're not acknowledging the fact that film is a different medium. And that's the key to a great movie. People go to the movies not to watch a documentary, unless they're watching a documentary. They go to be entertained, and so we wanted to entertain everybody with a story that was essentially true. We made a character called the Pope, who's actually a real character at Reed College, but he represents the entirety of the student body for us, all the characteristics of an average Reedy, but that would be a fictional character that we brought in. The confession booth, of course, really happened, and we changed some dynamics of the confession booth to fit our story, but the plot points are essentially the same.
In the book, you talk about God very anthropomorphically, very intimately, very personally. And you even talk about, for example, the devil and things like that. Whereas in the movie, there's not much of that, really, to be found. And I wondered if that represented like any progression in your own personal understanding of faith. Was one a literary device, or one, and where did that change come from?
Well, I think you hit on it when you said one is a literary device, and they're just two different mediums, and so you can't have an inner dialogue running in film. You have to show people. There has to be action. Life has to play against the protagonist. But really, in the book, it's about sort of feeling my way through. I mean, the first 8 or 9 chapters of the Blue Like Jazz are the widely accepted precepts of the gospel of Jesus explored through emotion, and then after that it's sort of Christian living explored through how does this really feel on the streets, and that was the shtick of Blue Like Jazz. And so the movie's different in that sense. It's different because the mediums are very different, and so inner conversion is extremely difficult to relay on screen, and I think we've done that. I think we've done it well. The book is a book about God and theology, and the film is more of a story about Don and his faith struggle. And so I would hope that people would watch the film and say, oh, okay, this is essentially where those topical essays came out of. It came out of this kind of a journey, and I think we've achieved that.
So that inner conflict that you convey in the narrative of the book is really played out between Don and the Pope, between Don and Lauren, and so on.
Yeah, between Don and his mom, and between Don and his faith community back home, contrasted against not only the Reed College community, but the community of another faith community that exists near his school that some of his friends attend, and so he's having to, figure out who he is and who God is in the midst of a bunch of different pressures and a bunch of different kind of competing antagonisms of what is a Christian and who is God, and what makes a good person, and why are these people who don't know God so good, and all those things that we really deal with if you're honest.
And I think if you think about it too, in real life, if you're going through any kind of a spiritual struggle, or you're doubting what you may think you are supposed to believe and things like that, it's so difficult to communicate that to the people around you. It's really difficult to actually hear someone who has a story about their faith that's actually a compelling story,
I have to ask you guys about the music. And of course, you could have gone with more jazz. That would have been a given. You could have gone with more period-appropriate music, I guess, to the time that you were at Reed College. But you went with more contemporary, edgy kind of music, and no quote-unquote Christian music. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts about the selection of the music, since it's such a big piece of the film.
I was really hoping to find some kind of a soundtrack for, what a Reed student might be listening to. And there's a band in particular called Phenomena, based out of Chicago, out of Portland, that I love, and that for me kind of became like the muse for the storytelling. And Danny Syme is their drummer. He became our kind of official composer, so between Phenomena's music and the music he wrote both for the movie and as his solo project under the name Lack Thereof. A lot of that was kind of the building blocks in the soundtrack. And in jazz, man, A Love Supreme was like really early on that we talked about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I worked on trying to get that secured for over 3 years. That was really hard, and as it should have been. It's an iconic piece of music, and they shouldn't be, letting just anybody use that piece of music. But we did what you're never supposed to do, which was we wrote it into the screenplay, and I could see no way around it. And in fact, it got to the place where they were, at the end of the day, they were very kind and gave us a reasonable quote to use it. But even their reasonable quote was still more money than we had. And so we were going to use it once at the beginning, and I was going to have to take out the usage toward the end of the movie, which kind of bookended it, which, was a really important usage as well. I don't know if I told you guys this, but we got into the actual sound mixing, the day we were mixing the sound, and we got to the end, and we had we figured out a version to use where we didn't use A Love Supreme at the end, and I listened to it, we mixed it, and my heart just sank. It's like, we got to use this. And I pulled our producer into a back room, and I said, I'm so sorry. I know what this costs. If I have to pay for it myself, I'll figure out a way, but I got to use this. It's too important to not use. So we made a last-minute decision to go back and use A Love Supreme at the end as well.
You're a known quantity in Hollywood, and your book has sold a ton of 1.5 million copies now. You're a known quantity. How do you pull this off from $1.2 million?
You hire Steve Taylor to direct your film, and he loses his mind. That's how you do it.
Everybody pitched in so much. Don elected to not get paid. Marshall got, paid a pittance.
He got paid. Marshall got paid, and I didn't get paid.
I was going to ask you if you did it for scale or or whatever. I mean,
I hitchhiked my way to this interview actually,
okay, nice.
So I'm making up for it.
Did you really hitchhike? You didn't get the cab?
I tried.
Yeah.
But I mean, as an example, Marshall gets paid a lot of money to be in shows on TV and things like that.
No, not that much money.
Well,
relatively speaking to this.
Relatively speaking to this.
Yeah.
And he's out with us promoting the movie for absolutely nothing,
I've seen him eat Reese's peanut butter cups.
That's right. Yeah. Okay.
And he has half a bed.
That's true.
Luxury on this movie tour.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that came from not only believing in Blue Light Jazz, but the way the project came about with Kickstarter and all the funding that came from that just inspired a lot of people to kind of give in kind, and we are the beneficiary of all of it.
In the book specifically, you talk about God in very human, intimate terms. And at the same time, there's a quote from your book. It says, God has never been nor ever will be invented. He is not a product of any sort of imagination. And I'm wondering, of course, in talking about God, we're prescribing God in a way, but every time we try to describe God or any understanding of God we have as a mental construct that actually gets in the way of us truly understanding God.
I don't know that I would agree with that, but
well, yeah, and I'm just curious how you feel about that.
Yeah, I don't think God needs us to understand Him accurately in order to interact with us or to redeem us or to be with us someday. I don't think He's, there are people who, I'm not one of these people. There are people who really struggle with being misunderstood. God is not one of them. He's just not one of them. He's not crying himself to sleep. So they just don't get me. That's not doing that. So, but He is out. He's non-material, which is not something our brains can understand. We only understand material things, and God has created us to only understand material things. So, for us to create constructs in our minds, I think is it's not good if it's misleading, and yet you have a mental construct of your wife that is inaccurate.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Amen.
Oh, come on now.
And she has a mental construct of you that's inaccurate. And I
Amen.
think if we have a sort of controlling personality, that is going to be very difficult for us to deal with. And so we lie to ourselves and say, no, we understand things accurately. And then after that, you get into semantics, and those semantics are important because they can lead to very dangerous theological ideas.
Well,
and I would say there is such a thing as a dangerous theological idea.
Well, clearly, and that's part of what the film and the book are about. I think is those dangerous theological ideas, and I think one of the things that like Rollins and Caputo are talking about is when we tend to hold up those constructs as God and worship them as God, that all of a sudden becomes my God is the right God, yours is the wrong God, kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And so I just wondered if, in the Reed College experience and since, if you've experienced any deconstruction or reconstruction of your understanding.
No, I think I've let go of some control. So even the people who are saying that when we create a construct, we're worshiping a false God, have themselves created a construct and worship a false God. So that's everybody on the planet. Mm-hmm. And but God, it's sort of like, do you have children?
Yeah.
It's like your children's view of you is extremely inaccurate. But do you want to? You still want that relationship, and it's not a wrong or inappropriate relationship. It's a fantastic relationship, but it's based on the spirit of things and not the facts of things. Mm-hmm. And that's very uncomfortable for a lot of people to interact with. But I'm not one of them. I actually find a lot of comfort in the fact that He is bigger than anything I can possibly understand or get my mind wrapped around. And that makes me think things are going to be okay. Somehow things are going to be okay because He knows what He's doing. And so I trust in a God who has a Son called Jesus and who lived in a culture that I will never understand, at a time I'll never understand, and came from a non-place that doesn't exist materially that someday I'll live in. All these crazy things that I have perhaps been caused to believe are true.
Do you believe you were meant to play in this movie?
Yeah, I do. Actually, that's what I emailed Steve when he sent me the email like, hey, would you consider our script and let us know if you're even interested. I emailed back and said, I'm 1,000% in, and thanks for the offer. And then he had to email me back and say that wasn't an offer.
The idea of unearned grace. In fact, my blog post today was just talking about your because I've always talked about the unworthiness, the sense of unworthiness, but you talk about pride, in talking about Rick and him trying to commit suicide and everything.
Yeah.
If you guys have had an experience of that feeling like you simply cannot deserve this grace that you're confronted with, yet here it is.
I don't even know where to start on that one because sitting here is unearned grace, mm-hmm. and this project had become so important to me and such an ultimate thing, which is a really bad place to live as a Christian, that I couldn't imagine life without it, and fully recognize that now and recognized it. Right before the Kickstarter campaign happened and we got funded, and I look at that whole thing as absolutely unearned grace, and I certainly don't think that's how God works, where you give something up and He gives it back to you, because it doesn't always work that way at all. But yeah, to meet Marshall and to the way all this came together in such an amazing way. I would never say all this proves that God's hand is on us, but man, I sure, for myself, am soaking in unearned grace right now, and do not take it for granted.
I don't feel like I've got enough yet in this life. It owes me something.
That's going to be the headline of this story,
Right. Yeah, I think it's so much unearned grace that you begin to disassociate at some point. You just go, okay, this is no longer about me or us. There's something going on here that's much bigger. And I'm also not somebody to say God is or isn't doing something, but it certainly feels like he's playing with us, not playing like toying with us, but he's playing with us. We're getting to play with our Father on this one. And everywhere I go, I meet couples who came together because they read Blue Like Jazz, right? And when somebody said I read Blue Like Jazz, it's like he's like me or she's like me. And hopefully this film will do that too. And you know, after having seen it and connecting with folks, people just won't feel quite as alone. And so if we do that, I think we're doing God's work.
And actually, thanks for that question, because it's really the first time I've gotten to kind of reflect. Because, I mean, we're basically trying to mobilize a whole million-man march to go see the movie, you know? And there's so much to do, and we have, you know, comparatively very little resource to get everybody to get the word out, to get in theaters on April 13th, so that we can survive, and so that people, you know, so that we can have people come and see this the next weekend and the next weekend, and that this movie can get out to all the people that not only read Blue Like Jazz and loved it, but to the people who need to see it.